All right, so let's start on the ground level of projects and actions that we need to get done. And the main tip for productivity here is to schedule things or use a calendar appropriately. This is very basic. If you're already using a calendar and you're familiar with the art of scheduling, you don't need to watch this video because it'll be just repetition of stuff you already know. Although feel free to watch anyway, because maybe you'll pick up something new or interesting. And often we might have this misconception that if we set rules and schedules, then that's just not a fun way to work, or that we're limiting our creativity and stuff like that. And I've always found that if I want to be productive, if I want to get stuff done, then just scheduling stuff into my calendar makes such a big difference to my day and therefore to the rest of my life. In the previous class about productivity, which you might have seen, we talked about the myth of time and this idea of like, I don't have time, and how that is a complete myth. I like to tell myself I don't have time to go to the gym. But since becoming a productivity guru, I've stopped saying that because I now reframe it as I am choosing not to make the time to go to the gym. If you're saying to yourself, I don't have time to take singing lessons, I don't have time to learn the guitar, that's absolutely not true. You do have time. You're just choosing to do other things with that time because we all have the same 24 hours in the day. So I think firstly, it's helpful to reframe the time thing as I'm actively choosing not to make the time to do the thing, which just reinforces to us that we actually do have the power and this stuff is within our control. And so there's kind of two components of using scheduling properly as a pilot. Firstly, it's understanding what we're actually spending our time on. We are notoriously bad at estimating how much time we actually spend on stuff. For example, there's this fun little study from 2013 that looked at my age group, so 25 to 34-year-olds, and it asked them to estimate how much TV they think they were watching each week. People thought they were watching 15 hours a week of TV, but when they actually measured their TV watching habits, they were watching 28 hours. So that's an absolutely huge discrepancy between what we think we do and what we actually do. And so one way of actually figuring out how much time you have is just kind of write down what you're doing. You might like to check out a video by my friend and YouTuber colleague, Matt Diavella. He's got a video where for 30 days, he scheduled in his Google Calendar like every single thing he was doing. And that really helped him figure out where the hell his time was going. And so if you're tempted to say, I don't have time to do stuff, then that's kind of exercise number one. Actually see where your time is going. It's enormously helpful. But more importantly, we want to be scheduling stuff into our calendar. And I think probably the single biggest productivity tool, like ignore Notion, Roam, Evernote, all that stuff, no one cares. Literally the single most important tool is to just have a calendar and use it appropriately. And so for me, my calendar basically dictates my life. As soon as I have any kind of inkling that some kind of event is happening, like, my mum called me up last night and said, this auntie from Birmingham is coming down next weekend for lunch. And so immediately I put that in my calendar because I know if it's not in my calendar, I'm not going to remember it. And, a standard principle in productivity and getting stuff done is understanding that our brain is for having ideas, not for storing them. And so if I'm storing these calendar events in my brain, stuff is going to slip through the cracks. If I'm thinking of stuff I need to get done and I'm not writing it down, stuff is going to slip through the cracks. So scheduling is super important. So that's kind of one aspect of it. It's scheduling important events in your life. I also like scheduling in social events. So for example, this evening at 7 p.m., my friend Sam is coming over and another friend Racer is coming over to visit as well for a takeaway. And so in my calendar, I've got 7 to 11 p.m. hang out with Sam and Racer. Just because it gives me an idea of what's going on in my day. Whereas if I didn't have that and I just sort of had in my head that, oh yeah, at 7 p.m. I'm doing this thing, I actually like in the morning when I'm being a pilot and setting my course, it would just be a lot of brain power for me to store all these events in my head. So using a calendar is so fundamentally important. As soon as you find an event, it just goes straight into the calendar. And then the gaps in the calendar are where we can figure out what we want to do. And so in the morning when we're setting our course as being the pilot, that's when I like to create calendar events for stuff that I'm going to be doing that day. So for example, today I had an orthodontist appointment from 2:30 up until about 4 p.m. And so I put that in my calendar. And last night I messaged a friend of mine saying, do you want to grab lunch after the gym? And so I scheduled into my calendar from 11 to 2 p.m. I was going to go gym and have lunch with this friend, which meant that I knew this morning when I woke up at like 8, 9 a.m. that I had this 2-hour window before going to the gym. And then from 4 to 7, because 7 is when Sam's coming over, I've got this other window of time where I can do something like filming this class. And so I've created a calendar event for filming the Skillshare class. And this might seem a little bit excessive, but in the very good book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, which is another staple in the field of productivity, he's got this quote about scheduling. He says that sometimes people ask why I bother with such a detailed level of planning. My answer is simple. It generates a massive amount of productivity. A 40-hour time-blocked work week, I estimate, produces the same amount of output as a 60+ hour work week pursued without structure. And what he's talking about here is this idea of time blocking, where you block off bits of time in your calendar for certain tasks. And I think like if you're struggling with productivity in any sense, then this is just the way to go. Like I find I can agree with Cal Newport. I feel like I'm more than 50% more productive when I have time blocked and actively scheduled my day. And that doesn't mean I can't change things as they go along. It just means I have a default list of actions that I could be doing. Also, in this book, Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky, which is another very good productivity book, they talk about this idea of how if we don't have a default thing in our calendar, what it essentially means is that we are not actually doing anything with that time. And so someone might say, oh, I keep getting distracted. But if you don't have written down in your calendar what you're supposed to be doing anyway, you're not getting distracted from anything, you're just watching Netflix. And so, for example, if I've got in my calendar 4 to 7 p.m. film Skillshare class about productivity, and then I get distracted, at that point, my brain knows I'm getting distracted from doing this thing that I should be doing. Whereas if I have a complete gap in my calendar, 4 to 7 p.m., and I end up just like sitting on the sofa and browsing Instagram, I'm not actually distracting myself from anything because I haven't got written down what I should have been doing. So I might be laboring the point a bit excessively, but the scheduling thing is just so important. What I do first thing in the morning, I like to schedule bits of my day and figure out when I'm going to do the stuff that actually needs to get done. And final point, like I said, the schedule doesn't have to be restrictive. It doesn't mean that I absolutely have to film this class from 4 to 7 p.m. You know, let's say a friend just knocks on my door and says, hey, do you want to grab tea or something? I'm not going to say no, actually, because in my calendar, I've got 4 to 7 p.m. time blocked. I'm going to be like, yeah, sure, come on in. But like the point is the schedule is flexible, but having that schedule is super important because it just gives us a default thing that we could be doing with our time. If you're wondering what app to use for calendars, it really doesn't matter. I use Fantastical personally. It's a bit expensive. It's got a subscription. You don't need that. Like the calendar app you use really doesn't matter as long as you're using some kind of calendar app. The default Google or iOS calendar works fine. Google Calendar on the web, like basically all calendar apps are the same and they all work perfectly well. And so we just need to be using some kind of calendar to schedule our time. So actionable task for this video, if you're not currently using a calendar, please download a calendar app and start using it. It takes a bit of practice, but I've been using my calendar religiously since like 2013. And I don't know how I lived before without it. Now, like I literally schedule everything and it's great. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.